Hello and welcome to the Rebecca Saunders Show, your place to discover how to build resilience, craft confidence, and have a huge impact on the world. Today's guest is my wonderful friend, Michelle Akhidenor, founder and CEO of leading Australian podcast agency, The Peers Project. Launching in 2019, The Peers Project produces podcasts for visionary brands from Fortune 500s to national powerhouses. Key clients of Michelle's include Alibaba Group, Indeed.com, Shopify, Forever New, and Modibody. Now, her company and its podcasts have been featured in Marie Claire, Smart Company, Ad News, BT, and Mumbrella, and a hell of a lot more. And Michelle was recently shortlisted for the 2021 B&T 30 Under 30 Entrepreneur Award. But prior to founding the Peers Project, Michelle started global podcast Peers to Peers, where she continues to host conversations with some of the world's most inspiring millennial entrepreneurs. And in 2021, Shopify signed as a podcast major sponsor. I could think of no better person to help me kick off the Rebecca Saunders Show than Michelle. And so today we're going to deep dive into why video and podcasting work so well together. Let's do it. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Yay! Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being my number one live guest on the show and on the podcast that we're doing as well.
Yay. Honestly, thank you, Becca. It's so cool that you have a podcast now, and I can't believe we're here and we're on the show and it's all happening.
It is all happening. We've got the kit. We've got everything. We're ready to go. Now, Michelle, I want to kick off. I know that I think your business has now hit 5 years. Is that about right? You're almost 5?
Four. Just hit 4. Yeah.
I feel like I've known you so much longer.
I know.
Tell me, take us back. Why did you start your Peers to Peers podcast?
Oh, such a great question. And I love talking about the origins of the Peers Project. So yeah, it really all started with the Peers to Peers podcast, which is now our company podcast that we run and that I've been running since 2017. So for me, it really started out as my personal passion project. You know, I was working in corporate and finance back in 2017 while still studying. And I just wanted that creative outlet and to come up with something where I could connect with amazing young millennials, entrepreneurs who were super passionate about what they were doing. And so I decided to start a podcast in 2017 when no one knew how to even listen to a podcast, let alone kind of, you know, what it was and all of that. And so for me, it really started there. And I just thought, why not start this as a side hustle, side gig? And then slowly, it actually turned into my business, which is kind of what we do today at the Peers Project, all about podcasting and podcast production.
Amazing. Yeah. And before we deep dive into that, because your clients are phenomenal, and we've had a number of them in the studio in Sydney, you've interviewed so many incredible millennials on your podcast. It has been hundreds of episodes, Michelle. Who's been your top couple of guests that you've had on, and what have you learned through this journey of listening to other people's stories?
Oh, such a great question. It's funny because Becca, obviously you were one of my first guests. So, you know, how could I not say you? I mean, oh my goodness. But no, I mean, oh my, like, you know, we're almost 170 episodes in. It's been almost 4 years. I think it's so hard to choose, you know, who was the top. But I would say just in general, getting to interview some of these amazing entrepreneurs from not just in Oz, but also across kind of the UK, the US, and Asia. We did a London tour and a New York tour about 2 years ago, pre-COVID times. And I think for me, it's really been about the breadth of the guests. Like, you know, everyone's from different industries. Yes, we're all young, but we're all so passionate and ambitious about what we're doing. And I think for me, it's really been those episodes and those interviews from those who don't live in Oz and who kind of lead different lives. You know, the other week we had an amazing woman from Bangladesh come on the show, and she's just incredible and what she's doing with her non-for-profit, you know, all the way through to, you know, some of your biggest Forbes under 30 in the US. You know, a top favorite of mine is Nina's episode, the A Day Girls in New York. And obviously their business is just incredible. So I could go on, but I think it's really just been the ability to connect with like-minded people and just talk about our entrepreneurial journeys. That's, for me, been the most special.
And you were reaching a global audience from almost the get-go. I know a lot of people I've been working with recently have just realized that the idea of virtual and video and you know, podcasting is in that mix now as well. The reach you can get, not just sticking within your own country or your own city, and the stories that you can learn and listen to has been pretty phenomenal. So, you know, off the back of that, I will touch on one of the big milestones of the podcast before moving on to the business, but Spotify coming on as one of your big, you know, your major sponsor on the show. How did it feel when that happened? Walk us through it.
Oh, Becca, you're hitting all the best points. Honestly, like, oh my goodness. I still remember it was only about a year ago now, less than a year. It started this year. And I was out for dinner actually and with a girlfriend, and we were just having a wine. It was like a Tuesday night. And I got the email pop up on my phone, and it was from the amazing Robin. He's the head of marketing at Shopify APAC, and him and I had been in discussions for a couple of months, end of last year, and it was just the email that kind of said, "Yep, we're going to go ahead with the gold, you know, sponsorship, and we're so excited to be on board," and that kind of thing. And I remember I had a wine in hand, and I almost dropped the glass because I yelped, you know, in just joy. And my girlfriend was like, "What just happened?" And I couldn't believe it. I think, you know, at that point, at the start of this year, we've been doing this for 3.5 years. You know, we've been podcasting for 3.5 years, as I mentioned, international tours, et cetera, and also just, you know, the hustle, trying to find the guests and make it all work and keep the episodes rolling every single week for that period of time. You know, for me personally, I've been hustling to try and lock in a sponsor and for sponsorship for about 2 years by that point. And, you know, it just seemed to be that, you know, the stars didn't align before, but in this case it did. And I think just the feeling was a lot of gratitude, you know, feeling super grateful, also feeling extremely excited for the new chapter of that podcast and for my baby, that little podcast that I started, you know, so long ago now. But yeah, it was the best feeling. And I guess, you know, it's something I tell my clients and our podcasters and our community, you know, it can happen and it does happen. You know, my show, our peer-to-peer show, is about, you know, it sounds like a lot of downloads, but 30,000 downloads. So you're not looking at 2 million or something to think that you'd get a big sponsor like that. So I guess I always say, like, it is possible.
Anything is possible.
Oh, exactly.
If you strive for it. For it. Yeah. And now, you know, I love it. It gives me goosebumps. And I remember sending you bubbles in celebration of such a huge milestone in business, because it's not easy to put yourself out there and really make that happen and have that traction on the world. So, you know, let's fast forward a little bit, or even backtrack depending on how we're looking at this story. Launching the Peers Project. Michelle, you have some of the most incredible clients on your books. You're now considered one of Australia's leading, if not the leading, podcast agency. Tell us about that. How did you get such amazing brands on your roster as a new company?
Firstly, I have to say, yes, thank you so much for the bubblies. And also, we could not do this without Pyrmont Studio and without you, Becca. I mean, let me just put that out there. The number of times I've called you because we're in COVID and I can't fly to Sydney with clients up there. And, as you mentioned, some big brand names that we have, and you just stepping in and always helping us out at the last minute with either studio hire or even yourself, being our on-site producer. I just
became a
can't thank
podcast
you
producer
enough.
overnight.
I know you do it so well. Always holding out for your own podcast, but yeah, I just have to say, like, so appreciate the support and like, mwah. But yeah, how did it all come together? So, we'll be super frank about it. My journey, although it may sound, how it sounds, and I'm super grateful where we've gotten to, it didn't start this way. Back in 2017, when I just started my little podcast and I was hustling to try and get people to even come on as guests, I had this desire to ultimately start a business, but I didn't know what that business was going to be. And so at the time, my podcast Peers to Peers was actually called the Peers Project. So it all kind of started with this idea of it being a project, it being almost a business, but it obviously didn't start out as that. And so, for the first kind of 2 years of running the podcast, 2017 through to 2019, I was just hustling on the side. I'd quit my corporate gig. I was back in Oz at the time and I was just trying different businesses. I tried a social media marketing company late 2017. That ended up failing. I tried a coaching business around kind of empowering my generation to step up and do what they're passionate about and help them with kind of their career trajectories. That ended up failing. I think I was about onto my fourth or fifth business model and type of business before I came up with this idea for the Peers Project and the agency that we have today. And so I always like to make that super clear, because sometimes people think, oh, well, she must just be lucky that, she hit the spot and, hit the nail on the head. And
there's a lot of lessons and failings along the way, right? That people don't necessarily see. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, Becca, when you and I connected, even in 2018, I think it was, like, I was still struggling through that process. And I remember looking at you and what you were doing with Delhi Agency at the time. And I was just like, this is incredible that, you were able to build this, and you were such an inspiration to me. And so, it's such an honor to be here with you today. But yeah, essentially, long story short, in 2019, after having all that, those failures in business, I looked back and I thought, what's the one thing that I love to do? And it was the Peers to Peers podcast. It was podcasting. And so I thought, okay, great. Let's just start from scratch again. I love to do podcasting. I've grown to understand how to do it now for, pretty well. We've been doing it for 2 years. Like, I've been doing my own podcast for 2 years. And I just thought, well, why not try and see if I can actually gain some sponsorship for the show? So let's start there. Let's see if I can monetize this thing that I love so much. And so what happened was, that's when I actually started the sponsorship journey of Peers to Peers. And I found myself in a meeting with a big brand name, and I won't mention who they were. They didn't end up becoming a client, but it's a big university here in Melbourne. And I was chatting with the CMO. I ended up somehow, through all of my hustle, I ended up getting meetings with some pretty cool leaders. And this guy was the CMO of this university. And I was in this meeting pitching my podcast to him. And I was explaining, like, this is everything we've done it for 2 years, like, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the meeting, he said to me, this is awesome, Michelle, and like, love all of this, but I want to do a podcast for our university. So can you do that for us? Like, I mean, you've done this, like, I'm surely it's similar.
Wow.
And I remember just sitting in the meeting and I was like, and like, my heart was beating so fast, because I'd never produced or done anything like that for anyone else. But, the hustler in me just said, yep, no problem at all. I can do that for you. No issues. Let me get back to you with a quote. Walk away from that meeting, have absolutely no idea how to start something for a brand. It's kind of very different.
Yes, and we'll figure it out. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, how many times have we done that? But
I think every entrepreneur has done that on a daily basis. Like, Yeah.
in the daily,
Sometimes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was literally that meeting and that deal, which ultimately didn't actually end up going through. But that was the moment that I realized the market opportunity. And at that point, it was early 2019. People started to understand and they knew how to listen to a podcast now. You know, the medium had matured. It was becoming, I wouldn't even say it was mainstream by then, but it was becoming a bit more known and people knew what a podcast was and they were interested in it. From a marketing standpoint. And so I just thought in that moment, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a podcast agency. It's going to be called the Peers Project. And the podcast will still run peers to peers, but that will be our example to clients, just like in this meeting, how it was for this specific client or prospective client. We'll use that. And that's how the idea came about. Within 2 months, we'd rebranded the business, or I'd relaunched the business, and turned it into a podcast agency, specifically a podcast production agency. And within, 6 months from then, we signed our biggest deal to start off with, which was our podcast for Forever New, the fashion retailer.
And for those people that are listening outside of Australia, Forever New is a big fashion retailer here in Australia, correct?
Quite big.
And how did it feel from there? You're producing a podcast for one of Australia's biggest fashion labels, and then you're now working with Alibaba and Indeed.com. You've got some big organizations in your sites. So you just who do you look for to produce? I suppose not who do you look for in terms of clients, but what are the underlying things in a client are you looking for before you go and pitch a podcast to them?
Such a great question. So I think really that's changed over time. In 2020, end of 2019, when we signed Forever New, I was pitching small businesses through to big retailers, through to kind of tech companies. I was just pitching across the board because I didn't know what would stick, to be honest with you. I ended up signing a couple of small business clients, and then Forever New was our Modibody at the same time. And then Forever New was our big kind of corporate retailer client. So I think back then it was just anyone and everyone who wants to do a podcast or wants to try it out. Now it's very different. So now I think we've really found our niche in kind of big business. So big corporations, we've got a couple, I can't name what's coming up next year, but we've got a couple others under our belt for starting out next year. And it's really those, I think the reason for big business is because with what we do, the goal and the mission is to impact as many diverse, amazing humans as we possibly can. And with big business, with the scale of the deals and kind of the scale of the audience listening, you can really do that. For me, as a woman of color, it's always been my dream to kind of produce podcasts and shows that showcase diverse stories and voices and try to do that and bring that to the masses. For so long when I was growing up, I would watch the news or I would watch TV and I would never see anyone like me up there. I just didn't see that. And so for me, I think it's always been this thing within me. I didn't realize this until recently, but where I don't want that to be the case for those amazing females and women of color that are coming after me. And I want them to see people up on the screens and in the massive podcasts that you listen to on radio who are like us,
Yeah.
And so that's why big business, because I truly believe that we can have that kind of impact with those kind of clients.
I love that. And I love that the synergy between both our missions there is impact on the world. And for you, it's a diverse audience. For me, it's, stepping into the uniqueness of you to have that impact on the world and not shying away from who you are as an individual. So, fills me with we could go so far on that, but that's a whole different podcast there, Michelle. Many episodes, I'm sure. In terms of, we work very closely together. You alluded to it earlier. I have jumped in and done podcast producing for you here in Sydney during lockdowns. across Australia. Vice versa, you've done it for me video-wise up in Melbourne when we've been able to. We have done collectively, videos has been filmed for your podcast clients. And I want to deep dive into this because I've been in the video industry for a decade. This is my, starting of a new journey with podcasting. We've known each other for years, and you've said to me for years, we should kick it off and start it. And I say to many of my clients, get on the video journey, just get started. What started you, or, what tripped the wire, I guess, in terms of stepping up from just being audio to adding that visual element to your podcast with these clients? And what has the impact of that been for viewership and the ROI for the client?
Such a great question. And honestly, massive is what the answer is. I think it depends. And for the clients of ours that use video, it's aligned with their goals and vision. And so really, we decide whether we use video depending on really what the client's goal and outcome is. And a lot of the time, that goal and outcome is more listeners, more people engaging with the content. And what we found, and I can speak specifically to Modibody on this one, we do this in your studio, Becca, but what we found was that we can repurpose the podcast content we were already creating. So all of the audio, we can repurpose that as video. And that then allows us to help to drive traffic to the audio. So essentially what that means is that audio and video is really great at helping to drive eyeballs and traffic to your audio. And so, whether it's a post on social media, and then you would know this way more than I would, but, whether it's a post on social media, a snippet, we do these 30-second promo snippets of video versions of the podcast. And then we tell people to go listen to the audio. We also do obviously the full length, and sometimes our clients love to pop that up on their YouTube channel or as an IGTV on their Instagram. And so I think really the goal is for these clients to maximize the impact, to maximize the number of listens, number of downloads, number of views. And so in using video, we can help them to do that. And more so, we find that clients are just wanting an element to video. Maybe it's not the entire thing filmed. Maybe it's just a snippet, or maybe it's a promo video. I mean, that's what we did for Forever New all of those years ago. We launched a massive promotional video of kind of the setting of the production and all the beautiful clothes and whatnot. And that debuted their podcast, and that helped bring in a lot of traffic. So yeah, I mean, I could speak to this for days, but long story short, it helps massively with the ROI.
And if you had, if we're just starting out with a podcast, or you've got, someone that's just started with a podcast and wants to add those video elements in, I talk around the difference between the places you can put DIY content. This is case in point. There is no crew behind us making this happen. They will shine it up when we finish, but they're not here making the production happen, versus bringing in the professionals to do that. What's your take on this? Because I know a lot of people through the pandemics have been doing DIY podcasts. Some top tips for people kickstarting that.
Yeah. I love DIY podcasts. We've got our really shiny, polishy, massive brand client podcasts and studios, but then we are also huge proponents for podcasters and just creating and starting from scratch. I mean, we literally have a course on this. It's called, and I'm going to make a plug here, but it's called Podcast Power 101.
What was that again? Shamelessly?
Podcast Power 101. It is an 8-week course, how to start and launch your podcast DIY using the exact same setup I've got, or Becca's got right now. Super easy. I mean, my sister literally launched her podcast off the back end, and her podcast is now doing super well, a lot of traction on social media. And that's a really low cost kind of option to kind of get you started. So I think top tips would be, number one, we're in audio, so it's a really great microphone, getting the right equipment, your right headset, right microphone, getting yourself set up in terms of your equipment. Very, very important. We also have a free guide downloadable. I'll send this through to you, Becca, and you can link it up somewhere.
Put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Perfect. A guide downloadable, which actually gives away what that setup is for you to easily buy. Second tip I would say is it's making the commitment and sticking with it. Podcasting is, and we talk about this a lot in the course, but it's that long-term game, and I'm sure video is as well, but it's that long-term game where, if you can't really just start with maybe 1 or 2 episodes. You can start with 2 episodes, but your audience, and if you really want to build an audience, they're going to expect that consistent flow of new content, of your new podcasts. And so it's getting committed and figuring out your why from the get-go, writing that up on your board, wherever you need to see it on your whiteboard, and just remembering why you're taking half an hour of your day, every week to do a podcast or to record a podcast. So staying clear on that. And then the third thing I would just say is, and obviously we've got a lot of help in this in the course and in our free guides, but is coming up with a basic plan and strategy to keep you accountable, So mapping out, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to commit to a 3-month weekly series, however many episodes that is, 12 episodes.
12, 13, depending on how many weeks there are. Yeah.
That's it. I was thinking, because we always do fortnightly for clients, so I was like, is that 6? 12, if it's weekly, and going, okay, from the get-go, that's how many I'm going to do. I'm going to commit to for season 1. And what's that going to look like? And how does that slot into my daily plans, my business, my weekly plans, whatever it may be? So yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And those 3 tips there, the number 3 is the one that I've been doing, right? It's the one where it's taken me a long time to figure out why we're making this show and what the impact of that's going to have on the audience. So being very clear on that vision and the accountability is huge. I know from my perspective, I booked everyone in for an interview. So it's not me just talking by myself.
Yeah.
I'm showing up, being accountable to the people that are giving their time to me to be able to have these conversations. And that's the way that I've been able to do that. So thank you for sharing those top tips. And for those of you watching or listening, depending on what platform you're on, as we're producing this show, both as visual and as audio, what Michelle said there in terms of points 1, in terms of the equipment, I equally have a similar download in terms of how to do that from a video perspective. So I will put both of those in the show notes side by side, because whether you do one or the other, the equipment is definitely number 1, and being consistent. So batch recording, I think, is probably going to be my takeaway, something that I'm definitely putting into play. Michelle, before I let you go, podcasting, videoing, we're pre-recording something right now. If we need to, we can just scrub it off, start again. Something's gone wrong. We didn't like it. We don't put it out to the world. You've just recently launched your personal brand, and you have committed to going live. Is it once a week?
Once a week.
Once a week.
Yeah.
How much of a shift is that for you?
Yeah.
Going live and doing it solo. I haven't seen you do any with interviews yet, so you're doing it solo. I know that feels a lot of people with dread. Like for me, even myself, I struggle to jump on live just myself, right? It's taken a long time for me to build that up. Tell me, how's it feeling? How's it going? It's only been a few weeks, but it's so different for you.
Yeah.
Walk me through it.
Becca, so different. And I mean, you know me so well. We're all about the batching of the content. We run these things called production days, and we pump out 3 to 5 podcasts in a day. I mean, you've been there with us. But going live has been such a different approach. And I think in so many ways, it's made me really commit. I think it's what it's made me do. I think when you are able to pre-record content, you have a schedule, and that's flowing out live. You always have times to go, you know what, today I'm not feeling the best. I'm not going to show up to this podcast well. Let's see if I can push this back an hour or to tomorrow. There's always that space to make a bit of an excuse, or people reschedule on you and you're like, oh well, all good, I'll do it next week. When you're going live, obviously that's not the case. No matter if you've been crying that morning, you've got you're struggling that day, you've got client work on, you're on a production, whatever it may be, making that commitment to your audience to show up every week. And for me, it's the Wednesday check-ins, it's Wednesday lives, weekly lives, has been just that true commitment, I think, to my personal brand. So yes, very excited for that. We're currently rolling out the Brown campaign. So you guys can check us out there. It's at Michelle Akhidenor. It's my last name. I'm sure Becca will link him up somewhere because it's a bit of a confusing one. But it's really just made me commit not only to my audience, but to myself. And I think that's been really just, I don't know, I feel a lot more connected to both, really. So look, it hasn't been without its challenges. The other week we had it not going live, and then I was spending an extra hour when I had clients and whatever. But I think it just shows to your audience as well how committed you are to helping them and serving them and being there for them. And that's really what MA Brand is all about. It's being there for one another, and for those of my peers out there, just showing up and being
Showing
that person that they
stepping
can
out,
talk to.
standing out. Yeah.
Amazing.
I love it. I'm loving the journey. I love how this all integrates together. You and I said before, can deep dive into this so many times, and we chat about it all the time. Even if we're catching up as friends, we deep dive into work-related things. Michelle, before I let you go, I have 2 more questions. If you could leave our audience with one major key takeaway message, if they just took one thing out of this conversation, what would you want them to know?
Just get started, whether it's with video, with podcasts, or whether it's with your website, whatever it may be, just start. It gets easier as you keep going.
Oh yeah. Practice makes perfect. It's an oldie but a goodie. Michelle, thank you so much. Before, we wrap the show, where can people find you?
Yeah, amazing. So firstly, Becca, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to debut your podcast. But people can find us at the Peers Project pretty much everywhere, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I mentioned my handle on Instagram already, at Michelle Akhidenor, where I'm rolling out my new brand. And then also I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's my secret favorite social media channel. And it's just Michelle Akhidenor on LinkedIn.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Michelle. Well, that's a wrap on another episode of the Rebecca Saunders Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to Michelle for joining me. I really hope you've taken away some golden nuggets. Everything we've talked about today will be in the show notes. And I hope you're one step closer away to having a real impact on the world. If you've got any questions about today's show, drop it into the comments below, and I'll make sure I'll get to those as soon as I possibly can. And if you'd like to know more about what I do, go check out RebeccaSaunders.com. I'll see you next time on the show. Have a great day.